Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the Baker Institute. When I joined the Baker Institute as its founding director in 1994, I can't believe that much time has gone by. I was an old man then, so I knew that energy issues would be a very important part of our Institute's work. We were obviously located in Houston, the energy capital of the world. Secretary Baker and I, with our long experience in the Middle East, understood firsthand the importance of the vital links in the energy market supply chain. Like many who were in public service in the 1970s, we understood the direct impact secure energy supplies have on daily life and prosperity in America and abroad. Moreover, energy supply and environmental issues obviously go hand in hand, and we knew that among the major challenges facing the broad new issues of the 21st century, energy and the environment would obviously loom large. Based on this knowledge of the importance of the issue that the Baker Institute began its research program in 1995. It was one of the first major substantive research programs this institute undertook at the very beginning of its creation. And we did it with a major inquiry into the future of the Persian Gulf. A study released in 1996, presciently, we can say, found that oil markets were vulnerable to a major short-term supply disruption, and that while the United States should be and is prepared to deter and defend against external aggression in the Gulf, we must also address what the United States can and should do in the face of the dynamics of generational and political change in the Gulf and in Iraq. The 1996 report warned that the threat to energy security might come from internal rather than external factors inside the Persian Gulf region, and that the United States and its allies needed to look beyond military issues alone to the emerging situations for economic, political, social, and cultural change inside these countries in the Gulf area, with special consideration given to the role of religious groups. The study called on the United States to support the governments of the Middle East region in promoting political reform, privatization, and broader participation in the economic system by its peoples to diminish the manifestations of social injustice and give rise to extremism and terrorism. It also recommended that the United States intensify its central role in advancing the Arab-Israeli peace negotiations, which remains the core issue in the region. Today, almost a decade later, the same issues loom large. However, and unlike 1995, when the price of oil was still at moderate levels and OPEC had spare capacity of over 3 million barrels a day, the international community is now facing the most difficult energy market it has seen in 2 decades. The International Energy Agency projects that over the next 30 years, $2.2 trillion in new investments will be needed in the global oil sector over the next 30 years to meet rising demand for oil. But despite the tremendous challenge facing us in implementing these investments, many governments, including our own, continue to intervene in energy markets in a manner at times that is slowing or even discouraging this needed investment. The question of who will be responsible for making these massive investments to fuel the future world economy is a critical one, and one that is evolving with time. Over the past 30 years, privately held Western international oil companies with publicly traded shares were responsible for a majority of the world's oil production. Some 40% of new oil production over the past 3 decades came from within the OECD industrialized countries, with the majority of investment made by these international oil companies. However, the IEA now projects that over 90% of new hydrocarbon supplies will come from the developing world over the next 20 years. The investment for this new oil production will come mainly from national oil companies, either traditional government-owned monopolies or emerging hybrid firms that are part state-owned and partially or recently privatized. This change will represent a major shift for international energy markets, one that deserves our careful attention. The growing importance of NOCs to the global supply-demand balance raises questions about their emerging policies, their objectives, and their priorities. It also raises questions about the role governments play in the day-to-day management of their NOCs. National oil companies have important responsibilities in their own home nations. They play a role in redistributing national wealth from domestic energy sources. They play a strong role in the pursuit of national energy security and domestic industrial and economic development. In some cases, NOCs are a tool of foreign relations and discourse. But all these objectives, while extremely important to national goals, can have a huge impact on an NOC's ability to expand its oil and gas production. This changing oil investment and supply situation is causing policymakers in the United States, in Europe, in China, Japan, and elsewhere to consider new options to ensure energy security for their citizens. Some Asian countries, most notably China and India, have responded to Asia's emerging energy security challenges by seeking out bilateral energy relationships with large oil exporting countries. By doing so, Asian powers ignore, at times, the instructive historical experiences of the West in managing oil crises and energy security. Hard lessons have been learned in the West about the outcomes of strategic bilateral relationships with key oil exporting countries to safeguard energy supply. Not only is China and India's level of equity oil ownership relatively small compared to its growing import needs, but also ownership of reserves does not alter the impacts of a global change in oil prices. By hoarding oil for one's own use, equity owners would miss the chance to sell at the higher price, which would effectively cost them the same if they bought the oil on the open market. Moreover, many host oil-producing countries might be tempted during a major market failure to take a larger share of rents from foreign investors, leaving less or perhaps no economic advantage to owning oil abroad. Equity oil itself can also be disrupted, leaving equity oil owners to scramble into spot markets in the same manner as those who didn't invest to have equity oil. Bilateral sales agreements are even less effective, as history has shown, because suppliers are likely to sell their oil to the highest bidder during a period of market crisis or a supply emergency. Thus, by the same token, speculation that the United States itself will need to create a national oil company to compete for scarce resources seems equally misplaced. As our study demonstrates, the privately held American corporations that currently look for oil worldwide are more efficient and productive organizations than any new government-run entity that is likely to be created by the U.S. government. The question of the future competitiveness of American companies and their continued access to resources is best answered, in our view, by U.S. government initiatives in areas where Washington has its rightful jurisdiction and experience. For example, in the very conduct and effectiveness of our foreign policy, in promoting and enforcing bilateral and multilateral trade and investment treaties, in utilizing foreign aid in oil-rich places where social and economic development assistance is badly needed, in enhancing the profile of important international institutions like the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, in fostering transparency and governance in oil-producing regions, and most importantly, in fostering a comprehensive domestic national energy policy that would enhance our energy security and increase U.S. credibility on the world scene. So the Baker Institute, together with our long and fruitful research partnership with the Japan Petroleum Energy Center, JPEC, has undertaken a major 2-year study analyzing the strategies and objectives and performances of the NOCs. The study consists of 13 case studies of different NOCs and economic modeling studies aimed at assessing their operational efficiency. We are very honored to release the findings of this study to you today. Over the course of the next 2 days, you will hear from the academic scholars who have been researching this study over the past 2 years. We have brought together some of the very top experts in the world in their various fields to share with you insights into the political and business culture of important NOCs and to discuss with you the geopolitical implications of the strategies of these entities. We also have brought together important leaders from industry to speak today on this important topic. We thank them for taking the time out of their very busy schedules to be with us today and to share with us their insights. This special event is designed to give our study researchers and authors also the opportunity to hear your views and to get your input on our study before it is finalized in a book volume. This study would not have been possible without the generous support and partnership of the Japan Petroleum Energy Center. I would like to thank my good friend, Mr. Masahisa Naito, who led the collaboration and whom I will be introducing shortly, and Tamiyuki Kudo, president of JPEC, for this long-standing partnership on energy research, which has been so fruitful over the years. I would also like to thank Accenture for their support and contribution to the National Oil Company study and to the Baker Institute Energy Forum, of which many of you are participants and members, for your support and participation in this program. It is this sharing of insights that has made our research so relevant and timely in considering future energy policy. Finally, I would like to thank Amy Myers-Jaffe for leading this effort and for the hard work of our Baker Institute fellows and staff and Rice faculty and student interns in putting this study together. They have done a tremendous job. This study was a major undertaking and included the participation of many talented and dedicated people. I would like to particularly mention just a few of the people that rarely get recognition. They're all sleep-deprived, who are responsible for the excellent program you will see today. Kenneth Medlock, Matthew Chen, Lawrence Mulzer, as well as Rice graduate and undergraduate students Stacy Eller, Trip Park, Casey Calkins, Syra Karim, and Rachel Marcus. If you're here, stand up and get a little recognition if you are here. Many of you, industry leaders, your support for our student internships is one of the elements of our program for which I am most proud. The Baker Institute is now evolving into more and more leadership programs, national and international. I know that someday soon some of the very industry audience members who will be attending our events will have served in these intern programs. We are fortunate in our program today to have such an illustrious group of keynote speakers. We will begin our session today with keynotes from two truly thoughtful global leaders who are making great strides in paving the way for constructive collaboration between IOCs and NOCs, and also NOCs collaboration with other NOCs. We are looking forward to hear the insights of James Mulva, Chairman of the Board and CEO of Conocophillips, and Victor Zichael Gao, Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Company Secretary of CNOC. But before we introduce these two outstanding industry leaders, I would like to turn the program over to my dear friend, partner, and world-respected energy leader himself, Mr. Naito, President of the Institute for Energy Economics in Japan. Mr. Naito and I have been collaborating for many years from the very beginning of this institute in geopolitical energy studies. He is the chairman and CEO of the Institute of Energy Economics in Japan. He joined the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI, in 1961. He's held very important posts in MITI. He has also served as the Director General of the Petroleum Department at the Agency of National Resources and Energy. He was a senior advisor to the Institute of Energy Economics in Japan. He's been a visiting professor to my alma mater, Georgetown University, which I thank him for. And he's been active worldwide as a senior associate for several institutions. His bio is in your program. join me in welcoming Mr. Naito to the podium. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for participating in the 7th U.S.-Japan Joint Study Conference. As Mr. Drijan explained, we have been in close relationship for almost more than 9 years, and our study started 7 years ago. And we have been getting very good, useful results for many times. Since the Baker Institute inauguration, I have been maintaining very close relationship with James Baker Institute. And for 2 years, we focused on national oil companies. So I would like to express my impression on this time study. First, as Mr. Drijan said, we have found that understanding the NOC oil strategies is very important for securing stable oil supply. Many years ago, so-called Seven Sisters had been expected to control the world's oil resources, but they now only 5% of global proven reserve, in my understanding. In contrast, NOCs have 77%. Given these facts, we have reaffirmed that NOCs have great influence on the world's crude oil market, and that a study on NOCs is decisively important for predicting further oil and natural gas supply. Second, we have found that crude oil price hikes have triggered the transfer of national wealth to stimulate and support resource nationalism in some countries. There is also a sign that resource nationalism has intertwined with relative national strength changes in the post-Cold War era. We have confirmed that NOCs can play a role in implementing national policies in many cases, irrespective of whether they are in oil-producing or consuming countries. NOCs such as Statoil, Petronas, Saudi Aramco, and so on, behave with accurate decision on the global market. On the other hand, in many cases, some NOCs are act differently. Resource nationalism approaches may be classified into two groups, the Russian model and the Venezuelan model. The Russian model emphasizes a long-term recovery and reciprocity of investment, and features easy to understand logics for the persuasion of the world. In reality, however, the model is problematic for oil-consuming countries, as indicated by Russia's suspensions of natural gas supply to Europe and sudden contract changes of oil development projects such as Sakhalin II. The Venezuelan model gives priority to internal populism-based political strategies, and the international alliances with countries which have similar stances to the world. I really doubt the economic rationality of the model. We have understood that resources nationalism depends on economic development stages, national governance and traditional cultures, and correlations between resource income and income-consuming populations in resource-rich countries. On the other hand, resource-rich countries and resource-consuming countries to secure their demand for resources. In this sense, further cooperation is required between resource suppliers and consumers. Business people view the Russian model as dangerous, while some researchers see it as understandable. Such difference is also very interesting for me, but I think the most important point in actual fair action, not just an interesting concept. Third, we have found two models for energy importing countries to address these problems. One is the French model, the other is the German model. The French model pursues an energy self-sufficiency rate goal of 50% or more, meaning that a country calls for domestically based companies to achieve the goal. The German model introduces the principle of international reciprocity and takes effective use of market force by inviting resource-rich countries to invest in the energy downstream sector of energy importing countries. In Asia, China exhibits an extreme version of the French model. It is willing to keep its current energy self-sufficiency rate at the level above 94% as much as possible in order to support the 1.3 billion people. Japan had adopted the French model until 1970s and has shifted to the German model since the late 1990s. This Japanese approach shift on energy can turn around during the economic bubble period in the 1980s. As a result, Japan disbanded the Natural Oil Corporation 5 years ago without fundamental discussions within Japanese policy making circle about whether to choose the French model or German model, depending on a simple slogan that what the private sector can do should be left to be done by that sector. It have been enormous doubts about the advisability of such Japanese policy-making approach, judging from the current status of Japan, meaning the energy self-sufficiency rate is limited to only 17%, including nuclear supply, or 4% excluding nuclear energy, despite its large population exceeding 120 million. The percentage derives far from the level of 50% based on international common sense. The joint study on NOCs has apparently provided us with a good opportunity to revisit energy policies of all consuming countries. Fourth, we have acknowledged that we should focus on international cooperation in efforts to address the present international energy situation. There are three key points regarding international cooperation: investment, promotion of technology development, and human resources. At present, regions available for upstream oil development by international oil companies having sufficient technological capabilities are limited to some 20% of the potential world reserve area. In this sense, international cooperation should focus on elimination of investment barriers. In this respect, as an example, the World Trade Organization may have to be linked to foreign direct investments. Systematic linkage between liberalization of investment and trade in goods should be considered more seriously. As for the development of technologies, technology plays the most creative and positive role to maintain the security of supply. We should work together to develop new technologies such as enhancement of oil recovery, development of unconventional oil, clean coal technologies, biofuel, first breeder reactor, nuclear fusion, energy conservation, and so on. As for human resources, we should continuously encourage and educate young people who are interested in energy technology and energy business. The time has come for energy producing and consuming countries to seriously consider and discuss their cooperation. There have been enormous discussions, but the time has come for us to specify focal points and make actual actions forward. Building on the joint study, we would like to depend study on desirable energy policies for the world. We have many other things to learn from our point study with the James Baker Institute on NOCs, which has been very significant. I expect that this two-day seminar beginning today will further deepen understanding about the above fundamental findings and provide vast information and ideas useful for future activities of business people and researchers. Building on this joint study, we Japanese researchers would like to maintain strong cooperative relations with the James Baker Institute and positively and send messages from Asia about energy security and global environmental problem. Next year's group of 8 summit meeting taking place in Japan is set to discuss energy security and global environmental problems as two sides of the same coin. Based on a report that the International Energy Agency will produce as requested at the GH Summit meeting in Glen Eagles, we would be happy to see discussions here having some impact on the message from Japan. I thank you for your interest and patronage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Naito. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Jim Mulva, the chairman of the board and CEO of Conocophillips. He's well known to you, doesn't need much introduction. I would like to note that he is a graduate of UT and served in the U.S. Navy, began his career with Phillips back in 1973, and obviously rose to the very, very top in all his capacities with Phillips and then Conocophillips. I also want to thank Jim and Conocophillips for their sustained and support to the Baker Institute's Energy Forum. Join me in welcoming Jim Mulva to the podium.
Good morning. On behalf of Conocophillips, I want to commend the Baker Institute Energy Forum for organizing this program. The topic couldn't be more timely, and we're honored to be a part of the discussion that takes place over the next several days. We also want to congratulate Amy Jaffe and all those at the Institute who had a part in producing what is likely to be a landmark research study in the energy industry. The growing influence of national oil and gas companies on the world energy market is abundantly evident, even to the casual observer. Companies like Qatar Petroleum, Statoil, Saudi Aramco, to name just a few, are moving well beyond their traditional roles as resource producers to becoming global energy providers with contributions all across the supply chain. Over the years, we at Conocophillips have had the opportunity to witness the growth and development of some of these companies on a first-hand basis as we've worked together on some pioneering energy ventures and long-life world-class projects. Not only have we been able to create some great projects together, we've also built some enduring business relationships. As we look to the future, there's no question in our mind that the oil and gas industry's success in delivering adequate, secure, and affordable energy hinges on the continuing cooperation, collaboration, and innovation by international oil companies and national oil companies. So, what are the industry investment needs? The task of meeting the world's future energy requirements is immense, and it is expensive. Immense because demand in developing nations is increasingly rapidly, and because demand in industrial countries, though growing less, continues strong even as domestic production plateaus or declines. It's expensive. Expensive because the industry must find and develop oil, natural gas in more remote locations, assemble bigger, more complex projects, create longer, more integrated supply chains, and expand the means to deliver to a larger, more geographically diverse market. The industry's anticipated investment needs, which were updated recently by the International Energy Agency, underscores the magnitude of the challenge which is facing our companies, our industry. The IEA's reference case estimates that industry will need to invest $8.2 trillion over the next 25 years for oil and gas development and infrastructure. Now, that's an average of $328 billion a year, and that's in 2005 dollars. That's significantly more than what has been invested annually over the first 5 years of this decade. Given the need for new supplies and infrastructure and the size and urgency of the investment challenge facing the oil and gas industry, we at our company feel that the opportunity for collaboration between the NOCs and publicly held international oil companies has never been greater. Let's talk about the NOCs, the pivotal players. I mentioned a moment ago how our companies had the opportunity to work with many of the NOCs over long periods of time. I'm gratified by all that we've been able to accomplish together. I want to focus for a moment on our company's unique relationship with two Norwegian companies, Norsk Hydro and Statoil. Now, this relationship is rather unique because we had the chance to work with these companies from the time they first entered the oil and gas industry in the late 1960s and the early 1970s. The Ekofisk area development in the Norwegian North Sea brought us together as co-ventures in a huge project that pushed out the technological and financial frontiers of the industry. I think we also broke some new ground in terms of the people-to-people component of the energy partnerships. Though the experience of working with Norway's NOCs as well as with the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate, our company gained an enhanced respect for the concepts of resource sovereignty and stewardship, a deeper understanding of the national social priorities, and increased sensitivity to the cultural values of another country. Now, I'm not saying that the learning process was a picnic. We did make mistakes, and I believe we learned from them, and hopefully we applied these lessons in other places with other national partners. And hopefully our Norwegian co-ventures gained something by rubbing shoulders with us on a daily basis. Something about the science and technology of the business, about energy financing, about project management, about the training and development of petroleum professionals. Beyond business, I'm not noted for a lot of humor, but beyond business, our Norwegian colleagues also gained other insights into America about our cowboy hats, our Levi jeans, and American barbecue. Today, when our company looks at Norsk Hydro and Statoil as well as the other leading NOCs, either partially or wholly government-sponsored, we're very impressed by what we see. We are impressed by the technical skills and project management know-how that the larger NOCs are demonstrating, not only in their sponsor nations, but in projects in producing and consuming countries around the world. Inside many of the NOCs, highly competent professionals have replaced staff whose primary role in the past has been to provide host country oversight. With the help of very competent service companies in our industry, the NOCs are tackling projects that only a decade ago, only the IOCs would consider undertaking. In terms of financial capabilities, the NOCs as a group are on firmer ground than ever before. The surge in oil prices that began in 2002 has allowed the NOCs of producer nations to build their financial resources at a rate not seen in recent history. So with the growth of their financial muscle and resulting improved access to capital markets, the NOCs are in a stronger position to bankroll big projects on their own, as well as make major acquisitions. Now the international oil companies. How do we adjust to this environment and this new paradigm? At Conocophillips, we recognize that the international oil companies operate in a much different world than we did just a decade ago. The traditional models for engagement between IOCs and NOCs of producing nations assume limitations of available local resources. That situation has changed dramatically as our partners in producing nations have grown more self-sufficient in terms of experience, expertise, technology, and capital. Energy consumers, particularly the American public, have failed to grasp the transformation that is taking place on the international energy scene. Many consumers, as well as elected officials and policymakers, cling to the misconception that future energy supply is solely in the hands of the publicly held Western oil companies, the so-called big oil. In comparison to most of the NOCs, big oil is not so big. A few simple statistics underscore the point. The Baker Research study that is the focus of this conference highlights the fact that 14 of the top 20 upstream oil and gas companies are national oil companies or newly privatized national oil companies. The state-owned oil companies represent the top 10 reserve holders internationally, and that the Western international oil majors control less than 10% of the world's oil and gas resource base. As we are all aware, access to resources has become a major challenge for the IOCs in recent years. Direct foreign investment in exploration production projects is prohibited in some of the most resource-rich areas of the world. Elsewhere, some governments have effectively nationalized local resources through taxation and other actions that erase the economic incentive for IOCs to participate. Furthermore, ongoing political instability in several producing nations has created unacceptable risk for new ventures. In the case of Conocophillips, we are moving on three fronts to address the access issue. First, we're fortifying our resource base in areas of the world where access is generally less restricted, the economic terms attractive, and the political risk acceptable. Secondly, we're accelerating our programs to develop non-conventional energy resources, particularly oil sands, and stepping up our research and development spending on alternative energy and renewable fuel resources. And thirdly, and most relevant to today's discussion, we are working closely with our current and potential NOC partners around the world to develop new models of collaboration that offer us an entree, if not direct access to resources. So what are the collaborative opportunities? We believe the opportunities for collaboration are numerous and in fact growing as the industry moves to increase supply capacity and to expand infrastructure. We recognize that each NOC is driven by a unique set of strategic motivations, and these may vary greatly from company to company and country to country. To be a good partner, the international company must be attuned to each NOC's commercial objectives, national priorities, and geopolitical goals. Issues such as local content, local infrastructure development are also important considerations in building a solid, long-lasting partnership. The one-size-fits-all approach is not useful. Tailored strategies are critical to building an IOC-NOC relationship, strategies that recognize the unique requirements of each national company while allowing each party to bring its skills and competencies to the table. NOCs can bring the knowledge of the country, from its basic geology to the details of the local market. They can bring hard-earned technical experience as well as finely tuned sensitivity to the political and social environment, which can assist greatly in managing the risk of investments. IOCs can provide technology solutions drawn from their global experience in working in a host of geological settings and under a broad range of operating conditions. They can also furnish big project experience and big project data management skill sets, competencies that are difficult to replicate and which are a critical contribution in this era of mega projects. As the national companies of producing nations broaden their investment horizon beyond the upstream, we see expanded possibilities for the IOCs to work with NOCs to ensure that their production is channeled to strong, high-valued markets. What the IOCs have to offer here is access at the end of the value chain, access to established major markets that often open the transportation infrastructure to provide market options to the NOCs. Finally, the IOCs are equipped to join with the NOCs in putting up the investment dollars needed to pay for the immense multi-billion-dollar projects that are becoming the norm for our industry. I refer you back to the IEA estimate I mentioned earlier, the $328 billion in 2005 dollars in annual investment needed for oil and gas development and infrastructure between now and year 2030. The capital challenge facing the industry is unprecedented. And who knows what the final price tag may be given the escalation of costs that we've seen over the last several years. Time and again, joint financing, combinations of local capital and outside dollars has proved to be an effective tool for blunting risk in a market environment that's notorious for its volatility. What are the new NOC-IOC models? To share the cost, spread the risk, and find the most effective technical and commercial solutions, new models of collaboration are emerging amongst NOCs and IOCs. While many different approaches are being tested, we believe that any successful collaboration model must be built around the following 5 components. First, must have complementary business and technical strengths. Second, should have material stakes for each partner. Third, a common dedication to maintain good relationships at all levels of the partner companies, starting with the CEOs. Fourth, a commitment to uphold the sanctity of contractual agreements. And last, a strong alignment of interest, not only on project goals, but alignment of the broader aspirations of each partner. Now, I'd like to emphasize a bit on that last point, the alignment of aspirations. Basically, that means a partnership should take into account the big picture for each participant and address the question, how can we help each other reach our respective long-term strategic goals? Now, this demands a larger focus, longer view than the traditional joint venture or production sharing models of the past. It requires that partners, particularly the IOCs like our company, be open-minded, flexible, and innovative compared to the models of the past. We believe our partnership with Qatar Petroleum, developing Qatar Gas 3, is an example of such collaboration. And that collaboration now extends to working with Royal Dutch Shell, QP's, Qatar Gas Petroleum's partner, Qatar Gas 4, and creating a single integrated operation from upstream to liquefaction. Looking ahead, we at Conocophillips believe there are a multitude of ways IOCs and NOCs can work together for their mutual benefit. But the IOCs, including our company, need to continue to think outside the box. For most of the industry's history, IOC-NOC partnerships have been tilted toward the upstream side of the business, while the major international companies were the predominant players downstream. Now, these traditional roles are changing. Today, downstream aspects of the industry are rich with opportunities for collaboration. The expansion of petroleum refining and gas processing capability, the construction of new transportation infrastructure, and the growth in both established and developing markets. The IOCs and NOCs should be looking at these opportunities together and exploring how their complementary resources could be used to create powerful, competitive business combinations. What is the role of governments? Obviously, a supportive government climate, both in a producing and a consuming nation, is critically important as IOCs and NOCs explore new ways and new models to work together. Governments need to recognize that the global energy landscape is changing and that their policies should adjust accordingly. On the producer nation side, we would like to see host governments broaden the opportunities for foreign investment. By enlarging the opportunities for foreign capital, producers can augment much needed reinvestment while freeing up energy revenues for other national priorities. In countries where direct investment or co-investment with NOCs is possible, it's important that producing governments avoid raising economic rents or increasing political risk to the point that national resources become effectively off limits for foreign investment. Turning to the role of consumer nation governments, I think the energy policies, particularly in the United States, are badly out of sync with the reality of today's global energy market and the major changes taking place within the energy industry. The United States has a double standard that says it's fine for U.S. companies to invest in producing countries around the world and to work with their NOCs to ensure that American consumers are adequately supplied. On the other hand, should NOCs wish to invest here in local energy development and infrastructure, there are few voices of support. More likely, there is a public outcry and political opposition. The United States can't expect producer nations to welcome investment and involvement from America's international oil companies if it isn't prepared to extend the hand of cooperation to foreign producers wishing to invest here in the United States. It should not be difficult for America to successfully balance the need to ensure national security in key infrastructure with the need to welcome appropriate foreign investment. On a broader scale, it's imperative for the United States to nurture a climate of energy interdependence among producers and consuming nations. It's disturbing to me that so much of the energy discussion and the United States focuses on reducing the use of so-called, quote, unreliable, unquote, foreign energy. Producing nations that have been reliable energy suppliers for decades must be scratching their heads and asking first, just what is the United States trying to tell us? Does it want our energy or not? Second, should we invest to increase capacity to meet future U.S. needs? And third, or should we invest towards serving robust markets elsewhere? In our opinion, the United States must start sending clear signals to its production partners around the world that their contribution to the United States energy security is vital now and for years to come. That message does not contradict, nor will it preclude current efforts to develop other alternative or renewable sources of energy. So in conclusion, high-level discussions such as this energy forum, enlightened by the Baker Institute's outstanding research, can do much to inform the decisions that lie ahead for private and public interest, for company leaders, and for government policymakers. Conocophillips, we are honored to be a part of the dialogue. The rising need for energy over the next 25 years will challenge the financial, technical, and commercial capabilities of the IOCs and NOCs as never before. We feel confident that working together, these challenges can be met. Thank you very much for listening to my comments.
Thank you for your comments. I'm George Baker from Baker & Associates. We work on Mexico. The question I wonder if you could expand on a little bit more is your use of the term energy stewardship. I think that's a very interesting way to speak about the subtle ideas of the international oil companies, of the national oil companies. But I noticed in this regard, you mentioned the Petroleum Directorate only once, and that as a kind of metaphor or a kind of model of energy stewardship. I didn't hear you in your comments talking about wanting to promote an energy petroleum system institutionally within the producer countries. I wonder if you could speak a little more about that.
Well, thank you. Your comments or suggestions and question are certainly appropriate. I didn't really have the time to cover all the subject that you would like, so it was really directed primarily to a discussion of the changing environment for international oil company investment and the emergence and the strength and capability of the NOCs and how we have to find new models to be working together, because through collaboration we have a great responsibility to provide energy to the consuming public around the world. And we feel very strong that all of us that work in this industry it's quite an industry in a way that development of energy is so important for growth of the economy and standard of living. In terms of stewardship of what we do in developing, providing energy for consumers around the world, it's not only to find and develop it in an efficient way, but we have to do it in a safe way. We have to do it in a way that is environmentally friendly, meaning not just meet the requirements and codes and rules and regulations of developing energy that meets the environment today, but looking out decades to come in a way that we provide energy that meets all the expectations of all constituencies in terms of the environment, emissions, quality of air, quality of water. The industry is a great user of water resources, so it's important for us to develop energy in a way that efficiently uses water and minimizes our use of water and returns water back to future use in a way that is cleaner and better than when it was brought into our facilities. In terms of climate and climate change and emissions, very important for us to make investments in our investments developing energy in a way, as I said, not only meets the requirements today, but looks at its implications for decades to come. I personally and our company, we believe that in climate change, it's important for us to continue to invest and adapt our facilities and our investments in a way that recognize this, in a way that starts to reduce the intensity level of the energy that is used to develop energy, and over time actually reverses the amount of emissions that are required to develop and produce energy. So I hope I didn't, I did. You make a good point, but through my comments the past several minutes, I hope you come across with a feeling that we as a company and as an industry have a responsibility to develop energy in a way that's done safely and meets the world and consumer expectations, the public's expectations, that we do this in a way that is environmentally friendly. By the way, in all of our investments and our new future investments, we actually build in and recognize and must have plans, not only from the financial side, but from the environment side and the cost side, of making sure that we meet the environmental expectations of the public at large for our projects over decades to come. We build it into our investment and operating plans. Other question?
Mr. Mulva, John Deers with Dow Jones Newswires. Just was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on your point that on why you think the U.S. needs to clarify its desire for international oil supply, and how you think the U.S. should make that statement, what way should that be done?
Well, I think the first thing that in my comments that I indicated, when it comes to energy independence, which we know is a very popular discussion point amongst Americans, we believe it's quite unrealistic to expect that the United States can become energy independent. What we do believe is very important is energy diversity of energy in terms of its where it comes from and the source of energy. We as a company believe that it's very important to develop all forms of energy. That could be oil, gas, coal, fossil fuels, nuclear, alternatives, renewables. I may be missing a point too, but we should develop all sorts of energy. And yet, first, one of the most important things we should do as companies and as a country, as well as around the world, is conservation. When I say conservation, more efficient use of energy, something that we really need to be doing. So we believe that energy independence is really unrealistic, but energy interdependence, energy diversity of energy, those are the key points. And to get energy interdependency and diversity, we think in an interdependent world economically, and energy is so important to the interdependence economically, we should encourage, not at the expense at all of security of our national infrastructure. We should encourage energy interdependence by investment for American companies around the world, upstream and downstream, and for foreign companies that want to invest in the United States, both upstream and downstream. And it's not done at the expense of national security or the development of alternatives and renewables and other sources of energy. We think this is a recognition of the world that we live in. It's an interdependent world, and actually by taking a view that we feel that we will not permit or allow foreign investment downstream or upstream in the United States, quite frankly, is out of touch with the real world and is really it hurts, or it is against really the goals of the United States to have interdependence in terms of political relations, economic relations, energy relationships, and in a way that gives us more security to develop our economy and our standard of living.
Well, I thank Mr. Mulva for some very interesting remarks and really framing what's going to be our discussion for the rest of the day. He's hit on some very key points, which I think you're going to see rebounding over and over again in our presentations and in the findings of our study. I'd like to take a moment to thank everybody for coming today and also mention our actual conference sponsors, some of whom we're going to hear from shortly. Accenture, Baker Botts, Japan Petroleum Energy Center, Morgan Stanley, Saudi Aramco, and our Baker Institute Energy Forum. Without their great support for today, we wouldn't have this beautiful function and be able to have this discussion. And as you will see when we get to the later part of the day, our tent for our entertainment and eating. So I really thank all of our conference sponsors for helping us put together a first-class event today. So that leads me to introduce our next speaker, David Asmus, who is a senior partner with Baker Botts. The Baker Institute has had a spectacular collaboration with Baker Botts. We've been all around the world together making these kinds of conferences in Moscow and soon in Dubai. And so it's really a pleasure to introduce David today. We have been jet-lagged together in many locations. David is a senior partner at Baker Botts in charge of the firm's global oil and gas practice. That's not a small thing, especially when you consider that he was named International Lawyer of the Year in 2005 for oil and gas by the International Who's Who of Business Lawyers. He also received the Chamber 2006 USA Award for Excellence for his work in the oil and gas sector, and has been an active co-chair on the AIPN, the Association of International Petroleum Negotiators. I know back in my first years as a journalist, I used to enjoy going to their meetings and see what was coming down the road in terms of the collaboration between IOCs and NOCs. So it's a great honor to introduce David to talk to us today.
Thank you, Amy. Just the fact that one of our sponsors at this conference is Saudi Aramco tells you something about how intertwined the IOCs and NOCs have become. I'd like to thank the Baker Institute for allowing me to participate in this program. I think this is a fantastic opportunity to talk about something we've all been talking about individually in a collaborative setting. Today I'm going to take a look at another aspect of NOCs, the challenges they face in participating in the commercial energy business and the effect those have on their relationships with IOCs. National oil companies are a diverse group. They range from sophisticated and technologically advanced entities, such as Petrobras, Aramco, Statoil, and others, to entities that function as tools for implementation of broader state policies, such as PDVSA, to entities that are really lacking in capability and experience, as are still found in broad swaths of the developing world. As a result, this talk will necessarily overgeneralize, but most of the points I'm going to bring here reflect factors affecting, to one degree or another, most NOCs. So what are the challenges affecting national oil companies in the first decade of the 21st century? Well, to begin with, and perhaps surprisingly, given prevailing energy prices in recent years, a number lack money for capital investment. In some nations, the national oil company is still a cash cow that is regularly milked to fund the national budget and which must beg the government for funds needed to maintain its future growth. By way of illustration, Pemex, the national oil company of Mexico, transfers approximately 2/3 of its annual revenues to the Mexican state, and that funds approximately 1/3 of Mexico's national budget. To maintain capital investment, Pemex must borrow funds, notwithstanding its enormous cash flow, resulting in an aggregate indebtedness of in excess of $45 billion. This same effect is seen in Venezuela, where oil revenues fund about 1/2 of the total budget. The impact of state calls on NOC revenues has been exacerbated recently by the increasing price of goods and services used in the oil and gas industry. We've all been dealing with that, and this is requiring NOCs to spend even more money just to maintain the status quo. A second factor is bureaucratic decision-making which can impair the performance of many less successful national oil companies. Often partially shielded from commercial pressures, and in many cases, readily adopting the sclerotic management styles of the government bureaucracies that control them, these NOCs can become more focused on preservation of bureaucratic turf within their country than on rapid decision-making necessary for changing energy markets. If governments rarely manage commercial enterprises well, many NOCs have only evolved a step or two beyond their government parents. For those of you, for example, who, like me, have historically dealt with procurement in Indonesia as just one example, and the old Pertamina rules, you're very familiar with how bureaucratic the world of NOCs can be. Political interference is an unsurprising third factor influencing NOCs. NOCs can find that their political masters are more interested in providing jobs or pork barrel projects or social programs than in finding oil. Expert managers may be pushed aside in favor of political appointees to serve short-term political goals. The firing of 2/3 of PDVSA's managerial and technical staff several years ago because of opposition political activity is only the most public example of this type of interference. Political pressures to perform may undermine NOC operations in other ways as well. In one recent infrastructure project in which I worked, a member of the government negotiating team came up to me during the break and said, "Look, you have a much easier time of this than I do. If the project fails, you'll get criticized. You might even lose some money. I'll go to jail." It's hard in that type of circumstance to perform one's job well. Finally, in a few cases, political interference may take the form of what I call inter-ministerial warfare, as NOCs become political footballs in battles between powerful government figures for control and influence. If an NOC is perceived as being aligned with the wrong faction, the result can be an enterprise starved of capital, stripped of power or assets, or surrounded by restrictions aimed more at punishing the NOC's patrons than promoting the national interest. Now, closely following political interference is its first cousin, corruption. Corruption is a daunting challenge for many developing world governments, and NOCs are not immune. Management may become more interested in looting a nation's resources than in developing them, and such attitudes quickly percolate down the ranks. If rent-seeking behavior begins to overwhelm commercial motivations, the enterprise goes into stagnation and decline as interest in investment for the future evaporates. I think anyone who was in Russia in the first part of the 90s, when huge amounts of capital were exiting the country, is very familiar with that problem. The personnel challenges facing NOCs do not stop with political interference in hiring and corruption. NOCs often have bloated payrolls as a result of state requirements for the creation of jobs and political patronage, but at the same time face critical shortages of skilled personnel. Patronage requirements themselves interfere with attempts to promote the competent, and today's industry conditions severely exacerbate that problem. High demand for technical and commercial skills in a booming industry, coupled with critical shortages of mid-level personnel in their 30s and early 40s, and I think if we took the average age of this audience, we would see what some of the problems of this industry are, followed by extended periods of lack of industry hiring, have generated a labor-starved industry where signing bonuses and rising labor costs are a fact of life. NOCs, as a result of their frequent capital constraints, are as a whole frequently ill-equipped to compete in this environment. I recently participated in a conference in Latin America at which a senior official of an NOC spoke and implored the industry to stop hiring away his company's best and brightest because the industry needed a competent institution with whom to do business. "Please lower your salaries," he requested, only half tongue-in-cheek. Many NOCs, aside from the most prominent and successful, also suffer from access to or a lack of motivation to adopt the latest and most successful technology. While access to technology clearly remains a significant driver for NOC transactions, with IOCs, NOCs continue to have a spotty record at best of actually implementing the best technologies in their own operations. For every Petrobras that can be pointed to as a leader in particular technology, there are 3 or 4 other NOCs that desperately need to join the 21st century. The reason for NOC's failure to do so is varied, but one overriding theme is that limitations on competition limit incentives for innovation. Innovation is hard work, and when not forced to innovate, it is very comfortable for some NOC's managements, like management in any industry, to continue to pursue business in the same old way. What are the consequences of this litany of challenges? The startling, or perhaps not so startling, result is that while NOCs, according to some commentators, control over 90% of the world's reserves, and I think the Baker Institute report says 77% of the world's oil reserves, and perhaps a greater percentage of the most attractive reserves that are easiest to extract, they account for only roughly 50% of the world's output. Looked at another way, NOCs on average produce only about 4% of their proved reserves per year, about half the figure for private industry. Given the state of world oil demand today, this is clearly insufficient. It's instructive to take a look back a decade or two to the Soviet oil industry prior to the breakup of the USSR, because we have the benefit of an industry whose inefficiencies were studied in great detail. As a result of years of problems of the sort that I've discussed above, by 1992, Soviet oil production was declining at a rate of greater than 10% per annum. Billions of dollars of capital, badly needed by the industry, were siphoned off and sent to foreign bank accounts. The technology in use was archaic. Equipment was unavailable or rusted in the fields. In 1990, for example, the prolific Tumen fields in Siberia suffered a $600,000 barrel per day drop in production, principally as a result of wells being shut in due to pipe and equipment shortages. A Center for Global Energy Studies report estimated that the Soviet Union lost over 5 million tons per year of oil production as a result of inefficiency. A McKinsey report in the late 1990s, after foreign investment had already begun to make itself felt in the Soviet Union, estimated that total factor productivity, that is, combined labor and capital productivity, in the Russian oil industry was only 55% of that in the mature Texas onshore industry. If the more favorable geology and younger fields of the Russian industry were factored in, the relative total factor productivity for Russia was only 30% of that in Texas. The report cited, among other reasons for this productivity gap, inefficient drilling using low-quality bits, mud, and cement, poor reservoir management, less hydrofracturing, huge numbers of excess workers, and poorly utilized idle equipment. While the Soviet industry may present an extreme example, the same factors that afflicted it afflict a number of NOCs today. Look carefully at these factors, and you will recognize a few characteristics of some prominent companies. This is not to say that all NOCs suffer from all or most of these ills. I will simply note that most of those admired today, such as Petrobras, Petronas, and the leading Chinese companies, and I'll give a free advertisement to my following speaker, Mr. Gao, have exposed themselves to global competition, have shed all or most of their state regulatory functions, are willing to participate and learn from IOCs, and may have international influence in their boards, shareholding, or management teams. Aramco is somewhat of an exception on several of these counts, but still manages to access IOC-level skills through joint ventures, expatriate hiring, foreign board members, and other means. In other words, aside from majority state ownership, many of these successful companies are, to one degree or another, becoming IOCs. Unfortunately for many governments, maintenance of control and preservation of a cash cow outweigh the desire to create an international champion. What does this mean for the future of relationships between NOCs and IOCs? For one thing, in contrast to some pundits, I do not believe the role of the IOC will disappear anytime soon. Many NOCs are institutionally unsuited to develop the latest technology and implement the latest management innovations. They will continue to rely on outsiders to regularly inject these qualities into their operations or risk facing a Soviet-style decline. Some NOCs suffer from significant capacity limitations, that it is infeasible for them to play a leading role in their joint ventures with IOCs. This reality conflicts with current political trends and desires to be the leader. Unfortunately, that brings the risk that these NOCs will reduce their ventures to a level of inefficiency that they are capable of managing. And I know any of those of you in private industry who've worked on a number of NOC-IOC partnerships are aware of the trade-off between management roles and efficiency. And there is a challenge there that all of us face, both in the NOC and IOC side. A few NOCs, for political reasons, may choose to forego the risk that exposure to foreign IOCs and their business demands present, consigning themselves to hosting a second-rate industry. The terms they offer will be unacceptable to the leading IOCs. Does Mr. Chavez really believe that Iran will bring him the latest and greatest technology and managerial techniques? Still other NOCs, the lucky ones, have become IOCs in many ways and will appear around the world as worthy competitors to the traditional group of IOCs. The ventures between these NOCs and IOCs will increasingly resemble commercial deals between IOCs, not international investment agreements with foreign governments. Finally, a number of NOCs, a large number I hope, will recognize the opportunity that the current atmosphere of scarcity presents to them to form long-lasting alliances with IOCs who are certainly more interested in securing access to NOC reserves than they have been for several decades. I emphasize secure because if there's one thing the last several years have taught IOCs, it is that all NOCs are not created equal. The enlightened NOCs will negotiate attractive but sustainable deals for themselves that provide them with access to management skills, technology, and competitive thinking, while recognizing the need of IOCs for security and an attractive rate of return commensurate with the risks they're taking and the benefits they're providing. What are the lessons for IOCs from the challenges facing NOCs? There are at least three. One is that there is still a role for the IOC, and there should still be a desire on the part of a substantial number of NOCs to enter into partnering arrangements. The second is that IOCs must expect to provide much more than cash for such a partnering to succeed. These days, the non-cash contributions may be far more the important ones. The third is that continued political management of many IOCs and the attitudes of their governments mean that investment protection for the benefit of the IOC will continue to be a prevailing concern in many such partnerships, including negotiations of sustainable commercial terms, incorporating available legal protections, whether those consist of investment treaties, stability clauses, neutral choices of law, use of international arbitration or otherwise, involvement of lenders and other potentially influential third parties where appropriate, and of course, the wise choice of the NOC partner. The challenges facing NOCs today are numerous yet diverse. There is no one-size-fits-all prescription for improving NOC operations or making partnering with IOCs more effective. However, there are enough common themes for those in both the NOC and IOC camps to begin to make improvements in the way aspects of the energy business under the control of the NOCs operate, and to recognize that the effort is best done together rather than apart. Thank you very much.
I wonder if you might give us a little insight given your experience. It can't be that the bureaucracy and the government leaders of the NOCs don't understand that if they keep sucking resources overseas, they're going to wind up with decreased volumes. So in the medium term, not just the long term, in the medium term, it's going to be a problem for them. How do they justify pushing ahead anyway with that kind of model?
Well, it's a very fair question. I think the answer is that you have some people in most of the countries that are afflicted with this issue that are very aware of this. And certainly, if one of the examples I gave of Pemex, which has been investment starved for some time, if you talk to a number of Pemex officials, they are painfully aware of this and they would desperately like to do something about it. And of course, Pemex has worked for some time with the Fox administration, the prior administration, to try to come up with a method to bring foreign capital into Mexico. The hurdles there were political. We're all aware of domestic political issues. They're prominent in this country right now, where for one reason or another, what would be good policy seems to politicians to be bad public policy. And I think that is one factor that's affecting a number of the NOCs is political constraints outside of their control. The people who are actually in the industry are aware of the problem. There are people who benefit from the short-term gains who would rather not give them up. I think in other countries, and this has certainly been my experience, there is in a number of places where there's not been a historic long-term investment horizon, a lack of appreciation of present value. Frankly, there are some countries where the biggest thing on the minds of certain government officials is how much do we get this year and next year? And no one looks about 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. That type of time frame is just not in their horizon. It's not unique to the energy business. It's a problem in certain countries broadly, that the lack of an appreciation of the long term really hurts the policies of the governments, not just in energy, but in other areas as well. So I think it's a combination of things, but I think it's fair to say that around the world there are a number of people in political positions who do suffer from short-term thinking, and unfortunately the energy business is not exempt from that.
Well, it's a pleasure now to introduce our next keynoter. Living in the United States, it was kind of surprising to have CNOOC become a household word in the United States as it made its attempt to buy a share or all of Unocal. So now most Americans know that China has oil companies, and many who read the details of the newspaper know that CNOOC is a very well-managed company and an international player. Victor Gao, who will be speaking with us now, is the Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Company Secretary. He represents the best and the brightest of New China. When I list for you all the things that Mr. Gao has done in his short career, it's really pretty amazing. He has served as an advisor to the Securities and Futures Commission of Hong Kong. He has worked also advising the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the United Nations Secretariat. He has been a lawyer at the famous firm Milbank, Tweed, Hadley, and McCloy in New York City. He has worked with the Morgan Stanley. So he has done quite a few things and gained a lot of experience before bringing that experience to CNOOC. And we're very honored to have him here today to talk to us from an NOC perspective.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor and pleasure for me to attend this important conference at the James Baker III Institute for Public Policy of Rice University here in Houston, Texas. On a personal note, if you may allow me to recall a bit of history, when Mr. James Baker visited China in May 1986 as the U.S. Secretary of Treasury and met with the Chinese leaders, I was the Chinese interpreter. I would like to take this opportunity to express my great personal admiration and salutation for a great statesman. Now, history is important when we talk about the present and the future. 10 days ago, on February the 19th, it was the 10th anniversary of the passing away of Mr. Deng Xiaoping. Now, depending on how one measures the beginning, either this year or next year, 2008, will be the 30th anniversary since Deng Xiaoping launched the reform and opening of China. I have called these 30 years since Deng Xiaoping's policy of reform and opening of China as the new China. Amy, it's the new China since 1977 or 1978. Now, one of the first things Deng Xiaoping did in new China was to visit the United States in 1979 and normalize the relations between China and the United States. And his historic visit to Houston, to Texas, ever since has etched into the national memory of China. I would like to say that without Deng Xiaoping, there would have been no new China. And without new China, there might have been no CNOOC. As we speak now, back in Beijing, CNOOC is celebrating its 25th anniversary, being founded on February the 15th, 1982, in the first waves of China's reform and opening to the outside world. Whereas it has been widely known that the new China started with the opening of 4 land-based special economic zones in China, it is rarely known that Deng Xiaoping also decided to open offshore China from the very beginning of the reform and opening in China. CNOOC was created as a national oil company as a direct result of Deng Xiaoping's reform and open policy. As it turned out, opening China's offshore turned out to be a little bit more complicated than opening China's 4 land-based special economic zones. And it took 3 years to work out the regulations on the exploitation of offshore petroleum resources in cooperation with foreign enterprises, which was promulgated on January the 30th, 1982, and CNOOC was established 2 weeks afterwards. Now, a little bit of history again. According to this regulation, China National Offshore Oil Corporation shall have overall responsibility for the work of exploiting offshore petroleum resources in the People's Republic of China in cooperation with foreign enterprises. And CNOOC shall be a state corporation with the qualifications of a juridical person and shall have the exclusive right to explore for, develop, produce, and market the petroleum within the zones in cooperation with foreign enterprises. For your information, in China, the dividing line between on-land versus offshore petroleum resources is 5 meters water depth. CNOOC operates mainly in offshore China. Next time, if you are in offshore China and find the water depth greater than 5 meters, you are most likely in CNOOC's jurisdiction. Now, as the NOC with the exclusive right to cooperate with foreign oil companies in offshore China, CNOOC from the very beginning has adopted an open policy and enthusiastically embraced the opportunity to cooperate with international foreign oil companies. Now, by the end of 2006, CNOOC has signed a total of 181 petroleum contracts with 76 oil companies from 21 countries and regions. As of now, there are 39 petroleum contracts with 29 oil companies from 12 countries and regions, which are still in execution. Most of our foreign partners are actually IOCs, as we may call it, including many firms from the United States. Now, for the record, as Mr. James Mulva of Conocophillips may affirm, CNOOC's current chairman and CEO, Mr. Fu Chengyu, used to work as a senior officer with Philips China as its VP and I think also as its president for a while. And this kind of experiences with international oil companies have helped CNOOC a great deal to grow its own business. For your information, in the first half of 2006, and we are right now, at the critical period of reporting for the full-year results, but please allow me to use the already disclosed half-year results. In the first half of 2006, our crude oil and natural gas production reached 68.3 million barrels and 77.6 billion cubic feet, respectively. The total net oil and gas production in the first half of last year reached 81.7 million barrels of oil equivalent. Now, it is important to note that the net oil and gas production from offshore China, which was 74.4 million barrels of oil equivalent in the first half of 2006, accounted for 94.74% of our total net production. What does this mean? This means our overseas production is still very small, accounting for only 5.26% of our net total production. Now, it is important to emphasize that 80% of China's energy consumption is based on coal. At present, oil and gas still accounts for a small percentage of China's total energy consumption. However, having said that, China now consumes approximately 2.5 billion barrels of oil equivalent every year, and almost half of that has to be imported. For your information again, approximately 1/3 of the crude oil in China is used to produce gasoline for automobiles. As you may know, China is already fast becoming the second largest automobile market in the world, next only to the United States. And the Chinese dream is not very much unlike the American dream. People in China love to own their own cars and love the freedom of driving. Now, it is important to note again that whereas the total oil consumption in China is approximately 1/3 of that of the United States, China's per capita oil consumption is only approximately 1/13 that of the United States. What does this mean? Does this give China the right to demand the same level of per capita oil consumption as the United States? No, I don't think so, because it would be impossible. Otherwise, China would consume more than the total oil consumption in the world. But does this give the right to deny China a reasonable increase in its oil consumption? No, I don't think so either, because China's continued growth of its economy will generate benefits and opportunities to the world economy as a whole. That being the case, while China's economy is expected to maintain strong growth for years to come, the challenge for China is to achieve greater energy efficiency and major breakthroughs in new and alternative energies. And in this regard, China and major energy-consuming countries, including the United States, actually share a common interest. That is why, for CNOOC, our mission is to become a first-class international energy company. This has several strategic implications. One, whereas we will continue to open our arms to welcome foreign oil companies, including the NOCs in other countries, to cooperate with us in offshore China, we will go beyond Chinese borders and seek opportunities in other parts of the world. Although we already have exploration and production operations in about 10 countries in the world, our overseas production, as I mentioned earlier, is only a fraction of our total production. We need to become more and more international going forward. This means we will do more and more businesses with the other oil companies in the world, including the national oil companies in other countries. Second, whereas CNOOC is already considered as a first-class company in China, we need to keep up with the good work and aim to become a first-class international company. In this regard, we will continue to emphasize good corporate governance, focus on our core competitive strengths, and to strive to create greater value for our shareholders. Number three, whereas our main focus right now is on oil and gas, we will carefully consider our strategy for new and renewable energies and pave the way for the day when we will not only be an oil and gas company, but an energy company including both oil and gas and new and renewable energies. In order to achieve our mission, we need to cooperate with many oil and gas companies and energy companies in many countries in the world. We want to be a valuable partner in creating a win-win situation for all the parties concerned. Now, when we go overseas, we actually reverse our role from an NOC in China to an ordinary company, an international oil company, as we call it, in other parts of the world. And we need to cooperate with the NOCs in the respective countries and regions for the markets. We believe that being an NOC in our own way actually helps us to better understand the interests and the desires on both sides of the equation, and therefore will make us a more valuable and constructive partner. We already have operations in Indonesia, in Australia, in Canada, and more recently in Africa, including Nigeria, Equatorial Guinea, and Kenya. We expect to go to more markets going forward. We will care for mutual benefits and create win-win situation with our partners. As a reliable and trustworthy partner, we look forward to cooperate with many oil companies in the world, including both NOCs and IOCs in other countries. We will cooperate not only in offshore China, but also in overseas market. Please help us to achieve our mission for our mutual benefit. Thank you very much.
Mr. Gao will take a few questions from the audience.
Could you elaborate a little bit on the comment you made that with China offshore being NOC itself, you believe that it gives you some advantage in working with other NOCs?
Thank you. That's a very good question. As I mentioned, China offshore has been open since 1982. And the way the administration of the China offshore petroleum resources is run is for the government to delegate almost all the major quasi-governmental functions to CNOOC. Therefore, in China, we are the principal party if a foreign oil company, either an NOC or an IOC in other country, want to come to Chinese offshore to cooperate. We are the principal party to talk to you, to engage in bidding process, and also eventually we will be equity partner with the foreign company in the framework of the petroleum contracts. Because of that, we have gained a lot of knowledge of understanding both the quasi-governmental functions and the strategic considerations of why opening China offshore is important for the country, as well as for China's economic development. Therefore, I think when we go overseas, as I mentioned just now, we reverse our role from NOC to an IOC, we actually think we can better understand the desires, the strategic considerations, the economic expectations of another NOC in another country. We will be an ordinary IOC in an overseas context, but I think with the benefit of understanding of both sides of this equation, it helps us and it may also help our cooperation partners. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Daniel Barcelo from Bank of America. Thank you for your presentation. It's very informative. A question regarding your attempted takeover of Unocal. If we go back in terms of the bidding for that, I want to question you in terms of building on Mr. Mulva's comments too about the U.S. government perhaps not wanting foreign ownership of those assets. Regarding Unocal, though, the U.S. government really never said no, and I would also say that the shareholders really owned Unocal, and most shareholders that we would have spoken to would have been very happy to take CNOOC's cash instead of Chevron shares. I just want to know a little bit more color on why Unocal, or why CNOOC never went to the end in terms of that, and really putting the offer to the institutional investors, because the institutional investors really have a fiduciary responsibility to take the highest offer. And then just as a follow-on, are you still interested in M&A globally or in the U.S.? Thank you.
Thank you. Regarding this question, if I may say several things. One is that the Unocal deal, as far as we are concerned, was already done in 2005, and we want to move forward. We want to look into the future. Secondly, having said that, if we could look back, I personally do believe CNOOC's offer for Unocal was a better deal. And because CNOOC, Unocal, as well as Chevron, three companies were all listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And we bid for $68 a share, and the Chevron's first bid was $60 a share. The second offer from Chevron was $62 approximately a share. I think if we follow the rule of the game, the CNOOC's deal should have been accepted. Now, it did not go the way we wished, not for commercial reasons, but for obvious reasons beyond our control in this country. And the reason why in my speech I wanted to emphasize that for China, China offshore has been open ever since 1987, and we have more than close to about 200 petroleum contracts with so many foreign companies working with us, is an attempt to show you that we do believe in oil and gas business. Greater openness, greater cooperation between one country and another is in the fundamental interests of all the countries, all the consumers concerned. And in this way, I really second the view of Mr. James Mulva of Conocophillips. Thank you.